Welcome to the Liberty on the Land podcast. This is Curtis Stone with episode 13 with yours truly. And what we're going to talk about in this episode is I'm going to take you through the cumulative research that I have done about the legal system in Canada, where we are, who we are, and why this de facto nation has no jurisdiction over us. So when I met these farmers on Vancouver Island a year ago, they really pulled me into these issues with the Agricultural Land Commission Act. When I came back from there, I downloaded myself a copy of the Act right from the Queen's printer, from the Government of Canada, or the BC Laws website, and I started to read it. And I found so many holes in that document. But one thing I discovered actually was this little thing called royal assent. And I talked about it in a few of the videos that I did about this thing. And at the time it was a thing I really got hung up on. And it's a good thing to get hung up on because there is no proof of royal assent. I had a number of farmers with myself and a few other people reach out to the Ministry of Ag and the people in the commission and said, show us the proof of royal assent, show us the signatures. They don't exist. There's only signatures from the clerk. There was one fancy document they sent me that had a signature from a lieutenant governor on the top right corner of the first page of a document, which doesn't make any sense in a contract. But that's not the important thing. The important thing was that there was all kinds of holes in the document. And more importantly from that, I discovered the history about Canada. And that's where the original idea for my podcast, Liberty on the Land, came from. So we're going full circle here. I discovered that Canada never confederated. And when Queen Victoria died in 1901, that was the end of the Dominion of Canada. And later, 30 years later, with the Statute of Westminster, that ended the Dominion everywhere. It was all done. But we've had this fraud, this fake system, this de facto system, been operating ever since without the consent of the people. If you want to learn more about that, go to episode 2 with Cal Washington, libertyontheland.com. You can also find them on YouTube if they're still up. And episode 5 with Doug Force, libertyontheland.com. We go deep into the history of this. And in this episode today, this isn't going to be the when, because the when was covered in history with those two podcasts. This podcast today is going to be the who, the what, and the where. And we're going to tear into these documents. I'm going to be sharing my computer screen. This is going to be a visual podcast. You can also listen to it on audio. And if you do, you can Google search any of these acts that I mention, because they're all very easily findable, and you can double check and reference everything that I'm showing you. What we're going to do here is show you the fraud of Canada, and we're going to go through all these acts to paint the picture of how Canada does not exist on the land. It never has. The province of British Columbia doesn't even exist as a province, even according to the Interpretations Act of Canada. It's not a province, not even defined as a province. So this whole place that we're in right now is essentially an anarchist zone. There's just a gang here pretending to be a government. I'm going to show you all of those. I'm going to start things off with delving into the legal definition of the word includes, to set the frame up, because if you don't know what the word include means, you will be lost, because what you think it means is not what it means legally. And that's going to be very important to set up. Then we're going to get into the Interpretations Act, the Oceans Act, the Shipping Act, the Citizenship Act, the Land Title Act. There's going to be a few more in there. And then we're going to get back to the Agricultural Land Commission Act to show you how that's all a fraud. And then I'm going to show you an act to finish, which should give everybody, every Canadian, real reason to be concerned. It's called the Foreign Investment Protection Act, brought in by Stephen Harper, signed into force in 2014. And that act actually got a lot of bad press at the time, and rightfully so. But it obviously got a lot of bad press because it was a right-wing government at the time, whereas if it would have been brought in by a left-wing government, it probably would have been crickets. But it's a terrible act, and it's very scary. And I'm not one of these guys that thinks the left or the right are any different. It's all wings of the same evil system, right? It's just the favoritism pendulum swings from left to right, and right now we're in the favoritism of the left. But this document is very scary. And there's an article in here which shows that China has the legal authority to deploy soldiers here in Canada to protect its assets. That's the one we're going to look at specifically. You can Google that document yourself and find all kinds of criticism of it. It gives China indemnity with environmental protection stuff. It puts muzzle orders on the media to talk about them. It's a serious act that requires a lot of attention. And when you pull the lens back and look at where we're going today and what's going on, all this civil unrest, all this defund the police stuff, it looks like we're in a massive decline. And when you look at a document like FIPA, it almost seems like it gives China a green light to come in and fix things here in Canada. And I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that that's not what it is. So as we get into this stuff, I want you to keep two things in mind. Who are you and where are you? Who are you? Are you a man, a woman, or a person, or a citizen? Where are you? Are you on the land? Are you on the land right now? Or are you in the territorial waters, on the sea? Are you on the seabed, the internal waters, the foreshore? There's going to be all kinds of funny words that we're going to look at in this one. And I promise it's going to be very interesting. If you're Canadian, you're going to want to stick around and listen to this. I hope that I can blow your mind. And there's no theory in this. This is straight up facts, reading right from the horse's mouth. All right, let's get into it. And I'm going to show you how Canada doesn't exist on any land. And why is that important? Well, it's important because if you don't know who you are and you don't know where you're standing, you will be railroaded by the political system for your entire life. And you'll see as we go through some of these definitions that it is very clear who the legal person is. And it's not clear on who the real person or the real men or women are. One thing you'll want to notice when we go through all these acts is that everything in statute law, which is the form of law that Canada uses, as it is with, as far as I know, every single country in the world, the Bar Association, all of that, it only ever references persons, residents, citizens, or whatever legal definition they create to have some kind of corporate entity. It never refers to men and women, rarely refers to human beings. Sometimes, in some cases, you'll see words such as natural persons, but never in any direct way. At least you won't see it in any of the things that I'm going to show you here. So it's important to understand what they're talking about and who you are. And the question I want to ask you is, are you a person that is lost at sea? Or are you a man or woman who's standing on the land? There's a clear difference. And when it comes to statute law only governs that which it defines. A big part of the reason you may have heard First Nations hereditary chiefs or Native or Indian people, whether in the US or Canada, say things like, we're on the land. We're standing on the land. I've heard this for my entire life. And there's a reason for it, is that a lot of these people, particularly in Canada, the hereditary chiefs, they're very clear on what Canada is and what Canada is not, where it is and where they are. And if you're in Canada, you're not actually on the land, because Canada is not defined on land. It is only defined on water. And I'm going to show you multiple examples of this. If you're a person, you're not on the land. You're on the water. You're lost at sea. If you're a man or woman, you're on the land and you're firmly placed on the land outside of the jurisdiction of Canada. And I'm going to make that very clear in all of this. So how did I get here? Well, in 2016, my first foray into this was through a conditional acceptance to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, who was basically trying to shake my farm down. And I've been consulting for farms for many years prior to that, not really knowing what was going on, but I had seen this sort of same thing roll out with many farmers over the years. Basically, some government bureaucracy sends you a letter, or some bureaucrat shows up, or they give you a call and they say, you are in violation to article this, subject this, code this, blah, 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 and you need to do XYZ. And I'd seen most farmers, actually every single farmer I ever consulted for, when that happened to, they basically put their hands up and bent over and said, do what you will. Because we all assume that the system has authority over us. And as you'll see as we go through this stuff, the reason for that is that simply everybody is ignorant to what the system actually is. Nobody really knows who it has authority over. We just assume because nobody reads the law. That's the thing that has blown my mind. And what I learned in 2016 is just by doing a little bit of research and exercising my authority, these people left me alone. So I received an email in 2016 from some bureaucrat who worked for the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And he informed me that microgreens were considered a high-risk crop. That was the terminology he used under section this, code this, blah, blah, blah of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency Act. And at this time, I didn't even really get into the act, but I was kind of freaked out, and I reached out to a mentor of mine, explained what was going on, and he kind of suggested to me what I should do. And I basically just did that. I kind of wrote my own, I did my own letter, basically. But it was actually all done through email. And from what I've learned with the system, you can actually engage with the system in email now. It doesn't actually have to all be in letters. There might be some specific reasons to do letters in some specific cases, but in my case, it was done through email and it worked. So they sent me an email saying, we want to come and inspect you. It's going to take 4 hours. You need to have all your employees there. You need to have SOPs available, blah, blah, blah. We're going to inspect your farm and decide if you are in violation of codes XYZ, blah, blah, blah. So I responded, and I did what was called a conditional acceptance, is I accepted the offer. And the reason I say it's an offer is because all statute law is a offer to do business, an offer to contract. And in commercial law, everything can be offered, it can be denied, it can be accepted, it can be conditionally accepted, or you can go silent. And usually if you go silent, that you fall under what's called a tacit agreement. Usually at the bottom of any government letter, there's, if you don't respond within this many days, you are going to be subject to this, blah, 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 blah. So there's kind of 4 doors you can go through: acceptance, denial, a conditional acceptance, or silence. And basically everything except the conditional acceptance is considered acceptance. So the conditional acceptance is to say, hey, I accept the offer on these conditions. And so I accepted the offer to the gentleman, and I said, be happy to have you come and inspect my farm upon these 3 conditions. And knowing what I know now, I would actually add way more conditions. But this was my first foray into it, and it was quite novice, but it worked. And I said, happy to have you on my farm on this date, on these 3 conditions being met. First condition is I want proof, I want to see a certified true copy of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency Act with proof of royal assent. Second, I want a copy of your oath to Her Majesty and that you will operate in good faith. Third, I just kind of threw this one in, I want a consulting fee for my time. You don't expect me to work for free, do you? So I would like $250 an hour for my time, and you can compensate all my available staff, which were 2 at the time, of $40 an hour for their time, because you're going to take us away from our work for 4 hours. This is going to cost us a lot of time, and time is money in this business. And then I said, you got 21 days to respond in writing to this address. And I demanded at that point that he respond to me in writing in a letter. And he came back to me very quickly and said, and he was, it seemed to me like he was totally dumbfounded and flabbergasted, but he basically said, okay, well, he'd probably never seen anything like this in his life, because in his line of work, just as a sort of a low-level bureaucrat who's just got this job, right? The guy just wants his pension, just does his job, working for the government, probably just wants to feed his family, probably not a bad guy at all. He came back and was completely shocked, and he said, well, I can't really give you those things because there is no proof of royal assent. I don't have a copy of my oath, but here's a bunch of documents that show you who I am. So he sent me a bunch of scanned copies of his ID, his position, and what he does and all that, and how it normally goes. And then he said, and then we don't have a budget for consulting fees. And so I basically wrote him back and said, hey, no problem. I guess that I can't help you then. And it went away. I never heard from him again. And I have to be fully disclosed to you that for the first 6 months, I actually didn't sleep a lot. I was really nervous. And is this actually going to work? Like, are they going to come back? Are they going to come and show up on my property and demand this and that? Maybe police involved? I didn't know. But they never did. Nothing. It completely went away. I imagine what happened on the back end is this guy didn't know what the hell I was talking about, and he took it upstairs. He took it to either the deputy minister or the deputy to the minister, or whatever that position is. There's sort of these deep state guys who are unelected, and they've worked in some of these bureaus for many years. From what I've seen, the elected officials, the ministers and whatnot, they don't know anything about this. But the deputies and the deputies to the ministers do, because some of these guys have been there for 30, 40 years. They know how this whole thing works. He would have taken it upstairs, and that guy would have said, or girl would have said, yeah, he's right. And the way I kind of look at the government is they're basically just a bully. And it's like the schoolyard bully. The bully doesn't want to push around the guy or girl who's going to knock him back in the head. It's too much work. It's easier to push around the guy who just takes it, right? And that's kind of, in my opinion, that's kind of what happened there. And they left me alone. And so some of the things in this bill that they added to the Agricultural Land Commission basically made it so that, you know, you had a family, and there was a number of people at this meeting that explained this to me. You have a family that, say, bought some farmland 50 to 100 years ago. The original parents lived on that land. Now they have children that are old, and they want to come and raise their kids on the farm. So you got the grandparents, in some cases, great-grandparents, grandparents, and children and great-grandchildren all on one farm. How beautiful of a thing is that, to have the whole family intergenerational on the farm, making their living on the land. That all this legislation was basically breaking up these families, because some of the people that I met at this meeting had gone so far as operating under the assumption, or not the assumptions, but what the act had said prior to this bill being amended. And they had invested a significant amount of money to build a home for their grandparents or their children, or whatever the situation was, to have them on the farm so that they can all work together. And these bureaucrats were showing up and saying, you got to tear that house down. This thing that you built here, you can't do that. You got to tear this down. And until you do, you're in violation of this and this and this, and you're going to pay this fine per day, blah, blah, blah. And this one guy I met there had basically spent $250,000 on nothing, because he was constantly being moved around. They kept moving the goalpost on where he needed to go, and he kept having to change things on his farm. So he spent all this money to just meet requirements of this act. It was insane. And even Jody Lucas at the Rusted Rake, she expressed to me that because of certain articles within this bill, they could not, check this out, how ridiculous it is, they could not sell the food that they were growing on their own land at their own restaurant unless they had a liquor license. So they had to get a liquor license and build a brewing facility so they could brew their own beer. Then that would somehow allow them to sell or use the vegetables that they grew on the farm. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely insane. At this point, I got really pissed off. That's where I started to dig into the Agricultural Land Commission Act, and I found a bunch of holes in it. I also, at that time, got really hung up on this royal assent thing, because the royal assent thing seemed like it was sort of a linchpin. What I actually later found is that there was things far better than this royal assent thing. And so in my videos, I'll just reference it real quick. The video was called Farmers Are Getting Screwed. Where is it here? It went fairly popular. I had two videos. So the first video I did was called Farmers Around the World Are Getting Screwed and It's Never Going to Change. This one here, that video was 8 months ago. I later had a follow-up about the royal assent thing here called So About that royal assent thing regarding Bill 52 and the ALC. So Bill 52 is the name of the amendment that they made to the ALC Act. I won't bother getting into it here. You can check those videos out and see what royal assent is. This weird kind of dog and pony show they do where they don't sign anything, because I think there's a reason for that, is they don't want to sign anything because Canada is a fraud and they want to limit the amount of signatures they have that basically show them complicit in fraud. Anyways, so I went down a rabbit hole with the Agricultural Land Commission Act, but I found a bunch of holes in the act, like the definition of person, the fact that they don't define farm. So putting the royal assent thing aside, you don't even need it, because you can look straight in the act and find that there's some definitions that don't make any sense, that basically show that they don't have any jurisdiction on you, and that they don't even define farm. So it's like, what are they talking about? Are we talking about land? Okay, well, where's the land? And that's where I'm going to get into with the rest of these. So basically, once I started to delve into the Agricultural Land Commission Act, I started to really dig deeper into a bunch of acts that I'm going to show you in this next portion. So the first thing we need to do before we go through these acts, we need to define a critical word. Because if you don't understand this word, you will be lost in all legislation and statutes and acts you read, because you'll be making massive assumptions. And assumptions in the legal system are very dangerous, because assumptions will lead you astray. And if you ask me, in my opinion, that is the point. The point is to confuse and let you make assumptions so that you operate under ignorance, and then that way they have control over you. The system, the government, has control over you. So I'm going to show you two definitions of this word. The first definition is going to be from Black's Law Dictionary, and then the second is going to be the base root of the word from the legal maxims. Now, we all know what includes means in common parlance, because in common parlance, includes means sort of to have a greater picture. So if I said to you, hey, I'm having a party, I'm going to have a bunch of great friends over, including myself and my wife, you would assume, and you would be correct to assume in common parlance, that I meant we're going to have some friends over and myself and my wife are going to be there. But in legal terms, what I actually just said is I'm having a party and the only people that are there are going to be myself and my wife. So it's going to be really awkward when you show up, because it's just going to be me and my wife sitting around and you're expecting a great party and you're socializing and all that. Another example would be if I said, we're having a dinner tonight. I'd love it if you came. Dinner includes dessert. The assumption would be we're having a dinner, right? So there's going to be food out there for dinner, and then there's going to be a dessert. That's what that would mean in common parlance. But what it actually means in legal terms is dinner is only dessert. So you're going to come over and I'm going to have a bowl of ice cream for you. This is very, very, very important. If you don't understand this, you'll get lost in any legalese. So this is from Black's Law Dictionary. Include: to shut in, keep within, to confine within, hold as in an enclosure, take in, attain, shut up, contain, enclose, comprise, comprehend, embrace, involve, including may, very important term there, may, according to context, express an enlargement and have the meaning of and or in an addition to or merely specify a particular thing already included within general words, theretofore used. So a bit of confusion with that, right? So at first it seemed quite clear to shut in, keep within, to confine within, right? Now, here is the legal maxim of the word. This is where you have to start doing some digging. Here's the Google scan of this book, collection of legal maxims. This is like from 1880. And the further you go back with this stuff, the better, because you need to know where the roots of these things are. So this is the book. You can, if you just Google legal maxim book, you'll find this. And what I want to show you is the legal maxim of the word inclusio, which is the legal maxim of this word. So we're going to go over to page 118, and we're going to look at subsection 961. So 118 here, subsection 961. Inclusio unius a inclusio ulterius. Terrible Latin translation or reading there, but the inclusion of one is the exclusion of another. Here's a larger legal maxim. This one came from another book on legal maxioms. Inclusio unis a exclusio ulterius. The inclusion of one is the exclusion of another. Just what we read. The certain designation of one person is an absolute exclusion of all others. Okay, this is absolutely critical to understanding before we proceed. You got to get your head around the word includes, because includes legally means to include one is to exclude everything else. So it essentially means that and only that. And I'm going to show you multiple examples, and this will become clear as we go through this. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's go to the Interpretations Act of Canada. Remember again, I'm not getting into the history of this. That was covered very, very in detail with Cal Washington and Doug Force. So all the historical references to Canada, we talk about the charter, all of that was covered in there. We're not going to get into the charter on this. We don't need to. Let's go into the Interpretations Act of Canada. You can Google any of these. So just Google Interpretations Act of Canada and then find the definitions, and you can follow along if you're listening to this on audio. So the first definition I want to show you is the definition of Canada. For greater certainty, includes the internal waters of Canada and the Territorial Sea of Canada. Now, we will define Territorial Sea in this and internal waters. We'll look at all of that as we go through this. But this is just an introduction. Interpretations Act of Canada. Next definition I want to show you is the definition of person. Remember, what includes means that and only that. So let's find person. Person, or any word or expression descriptive of a person, includes a corporation. So all this really should say is person is a corporation. That's all it needs to say, because includes is that and only that. The thing I would ask you, and I'll bring this up again, is if they wanted to say something else, why wouldn't they just say it? So with respect to Canada, because I've showed this to people before who don't know what what includes actually means, and they go, yeah, it includes. So it includes the land as well. Well, then why wouldn't they say it? Because
Legal contracts are very specific. If you've ever worked with a lawyer and ever been involved in a contract, which all of this is just a contract. Lawyers and the law is very specific. Every single article and point in a contract is very specific. So if they wanted to say, it's like, if Canada was the land, why wouldn't they just say it, right? If a person is more than a corporation, why wouldn't they say it? What did they have a limited budget on words? They can only have so many words and they have to keep it tight? I don't think so. You tear some through these acts and there's so many words, it's insane. For all intents and purposes, they're a word salad, and that is by design. So, Canada, person. Now, definition of province. Province means a province of Canada and includes Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. So again, if they're specific, why wouldn't they say province means a province of Canada and includes BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario, Nova Scotia, blah, 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 blah. Why wouldn't they say it? Okay, so let's look at the definition of territory in here. What's a territory? Because they did say Northwest Territories, right? So what is a territory? A territory means Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. So that's interesting. That basically is what the province is. Province means a province of Canada and includes Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. Province. Huh. Okay. Next one I want to show you is the internal waters. Because when we looked at Canada, it says here, Canada includes the internal waters and the Territorial Sea of Canada. So let's look at internal waters and then Territorial Sea. So the internal waters. In relation to Canada means the internal waters of Canada as described under the Oceans Act and includes the airspace above and the bed and subsoil below those waters, and in relation to any other state means the waters on the landward side of the baselines of the territorial sea of the other state. We'll look at the Oceans Act next. Now, let's look at Territorial Sea. What is the Territorial Sea? How do they define that? Territorial Sea. A, in relation to Canada, means the Territorial Sea of Canada as determined under the Oceans Act and includes the airspace above and the seabed and the subsoil below the sea. And in relation to any other state means the Territorial Sea of the other state as determined in accordance with international law and the domestic laws of the other state. Now, we could probably go down a rabbit hole in international law on this one. That would be kind of interesting to do, but would make this episode a lot longer than it needs to be. So now let's hop over to the Oceans Act. Now, there's a few definitions here I want to show you, because what you're going to see with all this is that Canada is, and this sounds crazy, but this is, I'm going to put it to you and then I'm going to show you. What you're going to find is that Canada only exists on water, and persons and citizens are lost at sea, and they are shipping vessels. It sounds crazy, but you're going to see as we go through these acts, that's exactly what it is. We're nothing but vessels. Citizenship is a ship for the citizen to navigate the territorial and internal waters. And I'm going to show you all of that. So, and again, ask yourself the question, who are you? Are you a man or a woman? Are you a human being? And where are you standing? Are you on the land or are you lost at sea? Keep that in mind. So, Oceans Act. This is an interesting one. The definition of law in respect of a province includes, there's that word, includes a law or rule of law from time to time. So that's kind of ambiguous. In force in the province, okay, we know a province is only Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. other than federal laws and the provisions of any instrument having effect under any such law. That's interesting. So it basically sounds like the rule of law, according to their legal system, only has force and effect from time to time in the places that are defined as province, which is Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon. That's really interesting. So, second, we want to look at the interpretations. So, we're going to skip over here to part 1. I'm going to read all of this for you. It is quite interesting. Canada's maritime zones. So you've probably heard that term maritime law before. That's what Canada is. Maritime. Mariners. That's the sea. Territorial Sea and the contiguous zone. Territorial Sea of Canada. The Territorial Sea of Canada consists of a belt of sea that has its inner limit, the baselines described in Section 5, and as its outer limit. A, subject to paragraph B, the line every point of which is at a distance of 12 nautical miles from the nearest point of the baselines. So basically, the Territorial Sea is 12 nautical miles from the shoreline out to the ocean. B, in respect of the portions of the Territorial Sea of Canada for which geographical coordinates of points have been prescribed pursuant to subparagraph 25A2, lines determined from the geographical coordinates of the point so prescribed. Now, we could go down a rabbit hole on any of these, but this episode would be long. I would highly encourage you to do it. Spend the time and go look up this subsection in this article. I just want to show you some high-level things that are going to prove the point that Canada is not on the land, and if you're a man or a woman and you're on the land, none of this is relevant to you. Determination of the baselines. 5. Subject to subsections 2 and 3, the baseline is the lower water line along the coast or on the low tide elevation that is situated wholly or partly at a distance not exceeding the breadth of the Territorial Sea of Canada from the mainland or an island. So basically, the part where the water settles at the low tide is the baseline, and then we have 12 nautical miles out into the ocean. That is Canada. It's this area of water around this, what we think is a country. Geographical coordinates and points. In respect to any area of which geographical coordinates of points have been prescribed pursuant to subparagraph 25A1 and subject to any exceptions in the regulations for A, the use of the low water line along the coast between given points, and B, the use of the low water lines of low tide elevations that are situated wholly or partly at a distance not exceeding the breadth of the Territorial Sea of Canada from the mainland or an island. The baselines are straight lines interpreted as geodesics joining the consecutive geographical coordinates of points so prescribed. Baselines wear historic title. 3. In respect to any area not referred to in subsection 2, the baselines are the outer limits of an area other than the Territorial Sea of Canada over which Canada has historic and other title of sovereignty. So, Canadian sovereignty, which is a reference to the Queen. The Queen is considered the sovereign, only exists in these low tide areas 12 nautical miles off the shoreline, not on the land. You're going to see as we go through all this, there is no evidence in their documents that Canada has any jurisdiction on the land and over men or women that are on that land. Low tide elevations. For the purpose of this section, the low tide elevation is a naturally formed area of land that is surrounded by and above the water at low tide but submerged at high tide. So they're claiming jurisdiction over the area of land that when the high tide is up is covering that land as well. So the beach, basically. They're claiming they have jurisdiction over the beach. Internal waters of Canada. The internal waters of Canada consist of the waters on the landward side of the baselines of the Territorial Sea of Canada. So I guess this is where the rivers come to the oceans, and you've got sort of those alluvial fans that come out. The baselines of that are also considered Canada. Part of Canada. 7. For greater certainty, the internal waters of Canada and the Territorial Sea of Canada form part of Canada. Rights of Her Majesty. For greater certainty, in any area of the sea not within a province. So we know province is defined as Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. So any area of sea that's not within one of those, the seabed and subsoil below the internal waters of Canada and the Territorial Sea of Canada are vested in Her Majesty in right of Canada. So she's claiming jurisdiction over these areas. So in all the areas that are not provinces of Canada, because provinces are only those 3 places, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. So all the other places where there's water and seabed, she's claiming jurisdiction. So that's interesting. Now, let's take a look at what a citizen is. Let's skip over to the Citizenship Act, and let's first define a few things within this act. These 3 here I'd like to define because they're all very interesting and they're going to lead us down another little rabbit hole. 1. Child. Includes a child adopted or legitimized in accordance with the laws of the place where the adoption or legitimation took place. Enfant. That's the French translation for infant or child. Citizen means a Canadian citizen. Citoyen is French for citizen. Citizenship means Canadian citizenship. Citoyennette is French for citizenship. Now, let's skip over to part 2 of this interpretation, where we get into some of the nitty-gritty of what this is all about. Where are we here? For the purpose of this act, A person is deemed to be born in Canada if the person, so remember, a person is a corporation, right? We saw that in the Interpretations Act of Canada. Straight up includes a corporation. A person is deemed to be born in Canada if the person is born on a Canadian vessel, as determined in Section 2 of the Canadian Shipping Act, the Canada Shipping Act, or on an aircraft registered in Canada under the Aeronautics Act and regulations made under that act. What the hell? We're gonna go there next. Don't worry, guys. B, a person who is lawfully present and entitled to permanently reside in Canada is deemed to have been lawfully admitted to Canada for permanent residence. And C, a person against whom a removal order has been made remains under that order. 1, unless all rights of review by or appeal to the Immigration Appeal Division of the Immigration and Refugee Board, the Federal Court of Appeal, and the Supreme Court of Canada have been exhausted with respect to the order of the final result of those reviews or appeals, is that the order has no force and effect, or 2, until the order has been executed. We thought we were talking about a person as in a human being. And now we're talking about a vessel. And now we're being pointed to the Shipping Act, the Canada Shipping Act. So what the hell? Let's go to the Canada Shipping Act. This is the Canada Shipping Act. Again, all of these things are right on the Government of Canada's website. You can Google each act, Canada Shipping Act. It'll take you right to it. Google actually does a pretty good job of taking you directly to these acts. And they're all on the laws-louis.justice.gc.ca. I would recommend not searching for these on the Government of Canada website. It is so nebulous, their search is useless. Just search right from Google and it'll take you right to the acts. Let's look at the definition of a Canadian vessel. Because remember, we said here, a person is deemed to be born in Canada if the person is born on a Canadian vessel as defined in Section 2 of the Canada Shipping Act. So, what is a Canadian vessel? Canadian vessel means a vessel that is registered or listed under Part 2, registration, listing, and recording, or that is exempted under the regulations from the registration requirement in subsection 46(1). What the hell are we talking about? So everything we can see here is showing you that if you're in Canada, you're in the water. Metaphorically, right? Because you're obviously not standing in the water. That's where I think the power of this comes from. Are we talking about metaphors? Are we talking about reality? And this is one distinction I find within common law and the legal system. They're both different. The common law is the law of the land, because that's where men and women exist in reality. The legal system is where persons, residents, citizens exist within a legal fiction created by them, which is on the metaphorical territorial waters, internal waters, what have you. So citizenship is a ship. It's literally a ship to navigate, or a vessel to navigate the waters of Canada as defined in the last three acts: Interpretations, Oceans, and Citizenship Act. They're all there. So quite interesting, hey? Now, let's try to find some evidence of land. Now, I had to search quite a bit to really get to this stuff, because there's so many acts and statutes that have been written over history of any country that it's like, you don't know what the hell is what. Like, how do you know where to go to one act or the other? All you can do is kind of search for things and try to find evidence for it. So let's try to find some evidence of land. And in my search for doing that, I came upon the Territorial Lands Act. So again, you can just search this. Again, it's on the Government Law Louis justice.gca website. So let's look at the definition of land here. Land includes, remember, includes means that and only that. So land is just mines, minerals, easements, servitudes, and all other interests in real property. Okay, so we're in the Territorial Lands Act. So we're talking about territorial land. Well, what is territorial land? Well, so land must exist within territorial land because we're in the Territorial Lands Act, right? Do you follow me? Territorial lands means lands or any interest in lands in the Northwest Territories or Nunavut that are vested in the Crown or of which the Government of Canada has power to dispose. So this one was interesting because they forgot to mention, or of course they didn't forget, they intentionally did not mention Yukon. So we have been in the understanding that when we were in the Interpretations Act and we looked at the definition of province, we were under the impression that a province was just those places, right? So where are we here? Province is Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. So that's interesting. So that's not what we're talking about? Now they've excluded the Yukon? So at first I thought that's where the only place that they would have land. But it seems like that's not even the case. And I can't explain the why to any of this, you guys. This is really all about looking at the what, the where, and the when. That's it. I can't explain the who. Okay, so let's try to find a little bit more evidence of land. So I'm in British Columbia, so that's where I've spent some time looking. So the other place in search of land that this took me was the Land Surveyors ACT. This is a British Columbia Act, and this can be found at bclaws.ca. But again, just Google Land Surveyors Act, and it'll take you specifically to the Act. So let's go into the definitions of the Land Surveyors Act and see if we can find a definition of land. Well, looky here. Land includes foreshore and land covered by water. So within BC, the only definition of land I can find right now is talking about the foreshore and the land covered by water, which is what we found in the Interpretations Act, in the Oceans Act, and in the Shipping Act. So we're only talking about water. Okay, now let's get a little bit more of a sense of what is British Columbia. So this apparent province that I live in, which according to their definitions is not a province, right? So what is it? It's basically an anarchist zone where there's sort of an occupying military presence here, which is the government of Canada, trying to convince you that they have jurisdiction over you, which they don't, even according to their own documents, unless you define as a person or a resident or a citizen. So this next one here is a bit of a mind bender, looking for further evidence of, where is the land? How do they define it? Where is this land that they talk about? So in my searches, another one that led me down this rabbit hole was this act called the County Boundary Act. Now, this is a British Columbia specific act. This is on the bclaws.ca website. But again, just Google search County Boundary Act and you'll find this. What I'd like to do here is read these 4 articles for you first and show you a little bit of interesting things to make note of there regarding land and water. And then we'll take a look at some of these word salads that define where the boundaries of British Columbia are supposed to be. Now, keep in mind, from everything we've looked at so far, there's no evidence that British Columbia is a province anywhere, because provinces are defined, according to the Interpretations Act, as Northwest Territories, Yukon, and none of it. Not BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, none of that. So, I don't know where we are, but this is an act for British Columbia, and let's start with this little bit here. 1. Division of British Columbia into counties. For all purposes of the administration of justice, and if it is not otherwise provided in an act relating to a special brand of it, and for all other purposes dealt with in the act, if the provisions of this act are incorporated or referred to, British Columbia is divided in divisions known and described as counties. So they're saying this area is divided into counties, but we're still not clear of what that actually means, because everything prior to this, historically, and everything we've looked at, doesn't talk about anything about land. It all just talks about water, seabed, foreshore, territorial waters, internal waters, etc. 2. Limits of counties bounded by water. The limits of all counties bounded or partially bounded by the sea extend to the boundary of the jurisdiction of the courts of British Columbia. Now, that is an interesting one. Basically, the courts don't exist anywhere outside of where there is water. Now, I've seen a little bit of this stuff myself in court, where you'll see any of these kind of sovereign guys I know who have gone and stood up in court. I never have myself. I've never been in a situation to do that. But people I know who have, and I've gone and witnessed it. I've also listened to hundreds of hours of court stories. But one thing that happens with a lot of sovereign guys is they won't step up to the bar, because crossing the bar in the court, like when the judge asks you to all rise and you go and you walk up to the bar, you're stepping onto the ship. You're stepping onto their jurisdiction. So if you've ever seen any of these freemen guys have it out with a judge, they always do it from the pews, and they're usually sitting down. Sometimes they don't even stand. They just stay in the back. They don't step onto the ship, because the ship is a metaphorical representation of coming into the water, coming into their territory. And so the courts don't exist where there's no water. And so if there's no ship to navigate that water, then they don't have jurisdiction over you. And last time I witnessed my friend Steve in the court, he had the judge spinning his head around for about 4 hours. They called session in 3 different times, and he refused to step onto the ship because he didn't have to. They can't force you to do that. And he was not being acknowledged as a person, but was standing in his own jurisdiction as a man. And the judge couldn't get him on anything. It was quite fascinating. Anyways, that's a sideline. 2, the limits of all counties on any inlet, gulf, or strait, lake, bay, or river extend to the middle of the inlet, gulf, or strait, lake, or bay, or to the middle of the main channel of the river, unless otherwise provided. Also include all the islands, the whole or the greater part of the comprised within the outlines of the counties prolonged. Now, we could further go into this. There is an act called something like the Islands Act. It would be interesting because an assumption here would be that, okay, it looks like they're claiming jurisdiction of the islands, but I have a feeling, based on the things that I've read in the past, that that's not the case. And if we looked into those, we might find something interesting in there. But we're not going to get too... We could go down all these wormholes and be here all night. 3, the power of lieutenant governor to remedy and settle boundaries. The lieutenant governor may, by proclamation, A, annex any small tract of land not forming part of a county to a county, or partly to one or more counties to which it may be adjacent, and B, settle any doubt which may arise or exist in regard to the boundaries of the ground of the county. So that's interesting. The boundaries on the ground of the county. So there's a little bit of discussion of land there, but it's not very clear. 2, the lieutenant governor exercises the power under subsection 1A. The tract then forms part of the county to which is annexed. 3, if the lieutenant governor exercises the power under subsection 1B, the boundaries are then boundaries between the counties affected for the distance specified. 4, alteration effect on process. 1, a sheriff, the boundaries of whose county are at any time altered, may, despite the alteration, proceed on the complete the enforcement or service within the limits of the old county of any final process in the sheriff's hands at the time of the alteration, or of any renewal of the process, or of any subsequent process in the same suit. 2, the acts of the sheriff are valid to the same extent as if the alteration had never been made. So kind of don't fully understand what's being said there. But let's look at some of these word salads to get a picture of, where are these counties and how do they define British Columbia? Let's look at the County of the Cariboo. I'm not going to sit here and read through all of this. I'm just going to read through a little bit to give you guys a sense of what it talks about, because it is interesting. Commencing at the northeast corner of the province, thence westerly along the northerly boundary of the province to the 126th meridian of west longitude, thence south along said meridian to the northerly boundary of the watershed of the Peace River, thence westerly, southerly, and southeasterly along the boundary of the watershed of the Peace River. So basically they're describing going around this body of water. That's what it sounds like to me. The boundary of the watershed to the Peace River to the point thereon which lies due north of milepost 34, as set on the 55th parallel of north latitude as established by survey upon the ground. So there's a survey on the ground there, like a peg or something like that. Thence south to said milepost, thence westerly along said surveyed parallel to the 125th meridian of west longitude, thence south along said meridian to the northerly boundary of Indian Reserve number 2. So they're going between boundaries of bodies of water and Indian reserves. Thence easterly along the southerly along the boundaries of said Indian Reserve to the southeast corner thereof, being a point on the northerly shore of Trombleur Lake. Thence easterly, southerly, and westerly along the shore of said lake. So again, you're following a body of water. That's how you're going easterly, southerly, and then westerly. You're going around this body of water. So it's, and so in here, they talk about some lots. Okay, so meridian to the northerly boundary of lot 3654, range 5, coast land district. Okay, so it's a bunch of water they're talking about, and then we get to these particular lots. And what are those lots? I have no idea. You could do some further research into this and find out. Let's look at Yale. So this is the area that I live in, which is supposed to be the Okanagan. And actually on your land tax, it actually says the county of Yale. So it's funny because we're all thinking that we live in the Okanagan or we live in Kelowna, but according to them, we actually live in the boundary of Yale. Commencing at the point of the intersection of the southerly boundary of the province with the westerly boundary of the watershed of July Creek, thence northerly along said boundary to the intersection thereof with the southerly boundary of Lot 1580, Similkameen District, and of Yale Land District. Thence easterly, northerly, and westerly along the boundaries of said lot to the northeast corner of Lot 1579. So here we went from, so it looks like they're claiming jurisdiction over some particular lot. So Lot 1580S, Similkameen Division. So it looks like, you bounce between these lots and then we still go along boundaries of lots, watersheds, rivers. So the only land I see reference here are these particular lots. And so what are these lots? I have no idea. I don't know how to find these. I just Googled around a little bit. I couldn't find anything. It looks like just going in here, we see Indian reserves. So the boundaries are between particular lots and then rivers, watersheds, lakes, and then Indian reserves. So reserves, lots, and bodies of water we follow around. So that's really all we have in this one. As you can see, we're not on the land, we're on the water. Any discussion of land is either very confusing or is not land, as we looked at in the Land Survey Act, or when we looked in the Territorial Lands Act, we looked at territorial lands and found that it was Northwest Territories or none of it. It's interesting that they say or. It's just so confusing. And that's obviously by design. These things are all very specific. So we're almost at the end of this, where I'm going to show you an article in the Foreign Protection Investment Act that everybody who lives in Canada should be very concerned about, especially if you're on the West Coast. So just for fun, I want to circle back. We started talking about agriculture. I want to circle back to the Agricultural Land Commission Act. This is the Agricultural Land Commission Act. You can Google this on the bclaws.ca website. I want to go into the definitions here and show you two and lack of one that basically show that this act has no force and effect. Not only does it have force and effect because farms are on land, right? Agriculture happens on land, but we know that Canada has no jurisdiction on land. So unless we're farming a seabed or a foreshore or a territorial water or internal water, this land has no jurisdiction that we can find, because they even cite, the Interpretations Act of Canada. The enactment of the province or Canada includes an enactment as defined in the Interpretation Act. In the Agricultural Land Commission Act, an enactment of the province of Canada. So, right, we know that the Agricultural Land Commission Act is a British Columbia Act. It's exclusive to what's considered the province of BC, but we know there is no province of BC according to the Interpretation Act, which they cite here. So they're obviously using that is a reference, right? So let's look at their definition of person. So in this act, because every act is applied to a particular group of people, we would assume that the Agricultural Land Commission Act would be applied to farmers because they're the ones practicing agriculture. One thing to point out right away is that they give no definition of either farmer or farm. So we don't know what they're talking about when they say farm. We don't. Maybe we can see something here in this Farm Practices Protection Act. Nope. We see farm business means a business in which one or more farm operations are conducted and includes a farm education or farm research. So includes farm education or farm research. Really? Most businesses I know aren't in that doing that. So look at this. Even in their definition of farmer, means the owner and operator of a farm business. And then the definition of farm business includes a farm educator or farm research institution, not a family farm just doing business, right? Not at all. So there's no definition of farm or farmer for anybody to do anything with, right? So then let's look at the definition of person, because like, who are they talking about in this act? Person includes, there's that word again, a First Nations government. What the hell is that? Are you a First Nations government? Am I a First Nations government? Let's look at the definition of First Nations government. So let's look at the definition of First Nations government. I love when they say means. It's one thing I've noticed just reading through hundreds of definitions on these acts is that means seems to be a bit more straight ahead than includes, because means is like, that's what it means. So First Nations government means in relation to settlement lands, and again, you could chase down definitions of all of these things according to whatever act they cite. So the Treaty Commission Act. And one thing that happened in BC that a lot of people don't realize is that the treaties were never really signed with very few of the First Nations people. And that's why when you go to any government event in Canada these days, they virtue signal about it. They've turned a truth into a virtue signal to hide the truth. And it's really interesting. So you go to any of these government events, and then some social justice warrior politician gets up and goes, oh, before we start today's event, we want to acknowledge that we're standing on the unceded territory of blah, blah, blah nation. And that's kind of it. This is the little virtue signal, and then they shut her down. The thing that's amazing about what they're saying is that they're actually giving you full disclosure. Because it would be, I've never done it just to save the controversy, but when they get up and do that little virtue signal, it'd be like, hey, guys, we're not in Canada. And you just told us straight up. So what are we doing here? Why are we standing here? Why are we here on the assumption that you have any jurisdiction over us? They even did it when I went to attend this public hearing about the Agricultural Land Commission Act. My video brought a lot of anger within farmers, rightfully so, about it. And they started to hold these hearings all over the province. And even at that one of the commissioners got up and did a little virtue signal and said, we want to acknowledge that we're on the unceded territory of blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, so you just gave us full disclosure that we're not in Canada and we're on unceded territory. So why are we doing any of this, right? Anyways, they do it. It's a thing that's happening these days. It's actually been happening for a long time. But anyways, so I digress. Let's read through. First Nation government means in relation to settlement lands other than treaty lands. So settlement lands other than treaty lands, the governing body that has legislative authority in relation to those settlement lands. Wow, that's a confusing one. You have to read over that a few times to really get something out of it. A1, in relation to treaty lands, the Treaty First Nation, and B, in relation to proposed settlements land, an Aboriginal governing body that, one, the First Nation, in relation to an agreement in principle applying to those lands, has been entered into, has organized and established within its traditional territory of British Columbia. Where's BC? I've never really found a solid definition. And has been mandated by the members of that First Nation to enter into treaty negotiations on behalf in accordance with the process facilitated by the British Columbia Treaty Commission, established under Section 3 of the Treaty Commission Act. So it's interesting because they basically say right there that they're still in negotiations. Because it goes, has been mandated by the members of that First Nation to enter into treaty negotiations. They didn't say it was done and signed. They said to enter into treaty negotiations, like it has yet to happen. So is that you? Are you a First Nations government? Does that make any sense to you? No, you're not. It's insane. So this whole act, just like everything else, has no jurisdiction over you if you know who you are and where you're standing. And this would be my question to any bureaucrat that came towards me if I was living on ALR land. I'm not at the moment, but I might be soon. Would be, so they send you some kind of notice, and it would be similar to what I opened up with when I talked about a conditional acceptance of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. They send you a notice that says, you're in violation of this and this and this. We've got a complaint that you put a building here. You can't do this because of code, blah, 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 blah. And you have 21 days to respond. Otherwise, you're going to be fined, arrested, whatever it is, right? Simply respond. Thank you, Mr. Bureaucrat, for reaching out to me about said articles and code violations of blah, 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 blah. I would like to know in your act, well, maybe start something like I did, is I would be happy to comply with your requests or your offers to pay XYZ fine in this time or whatever upon these conditions. First, I would like to see a certified true copy of the act that proves you have jurisdiction on the land. It is my understanding, by citing the Interpretations Act, the Oceans Act, the Citizenship Act, the Canadian Shipping Act, the Territorial Lands Act, the Land Surveying Act, the County Boundary Act, that you only have jurisdiction on seabed, foreshore, internal waters, and territorial waters. So I would love to see proof in your acts that say you have jurisdiction over this land at this said boundary. Second, I would like to see proof that you have jurisdiction over a man or woman that is on the land, and one that is not a First Nations government. Because when I consult the Agricultural Land Commission Act, I see the definition of person includes a First Nations government. And I would like to inform you that we are not a First Nations government. Thirdly, I would like to see where you define farm. Because according to your act, you do not define farm. And when I go and search other acts, such as the Farm Practices Protection, Right to Farm Act, I see farm business as defined as operations are conducted and includes a farm education or farm research institute, which we are not. You've got 21 days to respond, otherwise this offer is null and void. This would be some kind of way I would respond to anything from the Agricultural Land Commission Act, because according to everything they have in here, none of it has jurisdiction over anything. Particularly, and you can go further. You can just keep pushing them all these things. Show me where British Columbia is. You say you're part of British Columbia. Well, according to the Interpretations Act of Canada, British Columbia is not a province of Canada. So I would like to know where you claim you get your authority from. Simple as that. Okay, one more fun one, and then we're going to jump into the Foreign Investment Protection Act. Couple here. So this is the Motor Vehicle Act of B.C. This one here is a zinger. An accident. Here's that word again. Includes an intentional collision. Have you ever been in an accident in British Columbia? We have a monopolistic insurance company called ICBC, which is a crowned corporation, which is basically just a protected monopoly, and the CEO pays himself millions of dollars a year to do nothing, and it's a complete racket. They don't settle claims. I know so many people that have been in accidents, and it takes forever to get a claim, and often you don't even get anything. Perhaps this is part of it. I'm not saying it is for sure, but they do define accident as an intentional collision. So when you fill out the accident report to give to ICBC, it looks like, according to their definition, you just agreed that you caused the collision. So you did the damage. So I don't know what that means. But in their definition, it says that you caused the collision. It was intentional. So that's interesting. So some fun ones just to give you some food for thought. Now I want to finish with the zinger that is bringing me to the point where I feel that I have to put some of the things that I do on pause to prioritize my own family's well-being and the community around me, because this is very serious. Okay, so this is what's referred to as the Foreign Investment Protection Act, and they changed the name. I don't know why. Maybe because there was so much bad press about this. If you Google Foreign Investment Protection Act, you'll get dozens of articles about people that are going, this is insane. A lot of the lefties in Canada really jumped on this, primarily because it was from Stephen Harper. I'm sure if Justin Trudeau brought this in, nobody would have paid attention to it at all. But because Stephen Harper brought it in, it actually got a lot of attention, even from the CBC. And rightfully so. It's an insane act, but it's just funny because Canada's so left-wing that this would have never been paid attention to if it was brought in by a left-wing government. But I digress. So basically, I encourage you to go and read this yourself. It's very legalese heavy. This is like, when you get into this kind of stuff, it's so, you have to have experience to really understand it, because it's very word heavy. There's no shortage of words in this document, but this is the one that really only needs to be paid attention to. Article 33, Part 5. Nothing in this agreement shall be construed, A, to require the contracting party. So actually at the beginning, they were clear about who the contracting parties are. It's basically Canada and China. So here they define it here, means with regard to either contracting party, any natural person. It's interesting that they use, part of the reason they use natural person is because it's international. So, because if they're not, if they said person, then that would be the assumption that they were talking about a Canadian corporation, which would be a Canadian citizen. Natural person who has the citizenship or status of permanent resident. So, lots of Chinese people have permanent residency of the contracting party in accordance with its laws, and who does not possess the citizenship of the contracting party. B, any enterprise is defined in paragraph 10 of this article. Here really quick. Enterprise means any entity constituted or organized in accordance with the laws of the contracting party, such as the public institutions, corporations, foundations, agencies, cooperatives, trust, societies, associations, and similar entities, and private companies, firms, partnerships, establishments, joint ventures, and organizations, whether or not for profit, and irrespective of whether their liabilities are limited or otherwise, and be a branch of such entity. So, contracting parties is basically the two parties that are part of this document, China and Canada, or any other agents. So, here we go again. Nothing in this agreement shall be construed to require the contracting party to furnish or allow access to any information if the contracting party determines that the disclosure of that information is contrary to its essential security interests. So essentially, if China decides that any information that might be leaked from the Canadian media or anybody else is determined to be contrary to its essential security interests, they can shut that down. B, to prevent a contracting party from taking any actions that it considers necessary for the protection of its essential security interests. This is where it gets deep. I, or 1, relating to the traffic in arms, ammunition, and implements of war, and to such traffic and transactions in other goods, materials, services, and technology undertaken directly or indirectly for the purpose of supplying a military or other security establishments. 2, in time of war or other emergency or international relations. Or 3, relating to the implementation of national policies or international agreements respecting the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. Or C, to prevent the contracting party from taking action in purpose of its obligations under the United Nations Charter for the maintenance of international peace and security. So a little bit of virtue signaling here by the United Nations Charter. So this basically states that China can deploy military stuff and or persons in this de facto nation, which isn't land, but on the land, because they don't have jurisdiction on the land. And Canada can't do anything about it. So China can do all this stuff to us to protect their assets. And China, if you don't know, owns a significant portion of the tar sands mines and all kinds of other natural resources in this country. So they can protect those resources with their own military outfits, armies, whatever. They can deploy all this arms, ammunition, implements of war. It's insane. And when I look at, now this is where we're going to wrap up, is when I look at what's going on in the world, I see, and you don't need, you can go down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole on this, but you don't really need to, because you can read that and go, wow, China has the legal authority to deploy soldiers to protect its assets. And how do they justify whether they need to protect them or not? I have no idea. Maybe if we comb through this whole thing tooth and nail, we'd find an answer. But as you can see, it's quite a word salad. But it's fairly obvious there. Show this to a lawyer, see what they say. But it looks like the way we're going is we're in this crisis stage. And is China the one that's behind all this meddling in Western society? Well, we do know, according to many leaked documents in the United States, that China has been siphoning IP from the U.S. for a long time. They've also been doing some shady things in Canada. We had that CEO of Huawei that was detained in Canada. We've had a number of Chinese infiltrators, and that's quite mainstream news for quite a long time. So we know that there's an economic and information war going on with China. So why would we assume that there wasn't a cultural war going on? And perhaps that's the greater picture. So, like I said, you can go down the rabbit hole of all kinds of conspiracy theories on why things are one way or the other. I find it more useful to just look at the what, the where, and the when than it is to worry about the why. Because you can spend a lifetime chasing the why. And I certainly have spent many years doing that. But I actually get a lot of utility of reading this, because now I go, okay, this looks like it could happen, because the legal framework is there for it to happen. So what do we do? Well, one thing I'm trying to do, and I would encourage those of you to do, if you have the resources or the ability or time to do so, is to get out of the cities. And, I've built my career on this moniker, the urban farmer, and I don't regret any of the work I did. I stand by everything that I ever produced. There's value in urban farms, but if we are getting to a point where the cities are just not safe, I don't think we should be in them. Either you're talking about civil unrest, the defunding of the police department. That's even a conversation in Canada now. Cities could be dangerous because things always happen in the cities first, right? If you're a government and you want to control people, you do it in the cities. That's why cities always have more regulation, and the countries are, especially the unincorporated areas, are very deregulated. So the freedom zones exist outside of the cities. And if there's going to be any, police force that's brought in, I wonder, and again, I'm speculating, take this for what it's worth, but with all this narrative of defund the police, they're going to let police departments dissolve, and that's going to cause instability. That's going to cause violence. Criminals will do more things. They're letting all kinds of criminals out of prison right now. That's been well documented in mainstream news. It seems to me like what's going to happen is they're going to let the shit hit the fan, for lack of a better term. And eventually people are going to call for some kind of police force because they're going to need it. And what will that police force be? I don't know. I'll make two guesses. And they're kind of two guesses in one. And I'm willing to accept, call me crazy, whatever. This is just me speculating. I showed a lot of facts before. We're going to spend a couple minutes on me speculating. That if they want to dissolve police forces under the guise of, institutional racism and political correctness and all that, they'll bring in a politically correct alternative, which could be one of two things. Could be a UN police force that is unbiased, and every member of that UN police force have gone through all their diversity training and all that, and they've had all the racism shaken out of them, and make sure that they fill all the racial quotas, So might be a perfect opportunity to have a predominantly Chinese UN police force or a robot police force. And I don't think we're that far off from that actually being a possibility in today's world. There's a company called Boston Dynamics that's been making robots that are bipedal and are straight up out of the movie RoboCop, except the sort of human hybrid. But we're getting there. If you've ever seen the movie Elysium with Matt Damon, there's sort of this post-apocalyptic scenario where all the rich people live on this space station above Earth. Earth is basically just a bona fide shithole, polluted, and nobody wants to be there. All the rich people are up in space in this utopia, and down on Earth, it's all policed by these robot cops that just push everybody around, but equally so because they cannot be racist because they're robots. So I'm not necessarily saying that because that seems a little bit far-fetched. However, the technology does exist. So this is where I think things might be going. And again, I don't want to instill fear in people. And how long will this take? I have no idea. This might take years. You know, this whole system to get to where we are has taken thousands of years. And even just within the acts I've showed you, we covered about 100 years there. And, you know, when we go further back to when Queen Victoria died, you know, that's over 100 years ago. Queen Victoria died in 1901. That was essentially the end of the Dominion. 1867, before she died, she brought in the Statute Law Revision Act, which removed the enacting clause from the British North America Act. Again, go to my podcast with Cal Washington and Doug Force and get all that sorted out. They reference all the documents. Queen Victoria died in 1901. That was the official end of the Dominion. Canada remained dependent for 30 or so years afterwards. And then they brought in the Statute of Westminster, which was either 31 or 37, 1931-37, which officially ended the Dominion. But because the Statute Law Revision Act ended the Dominion at the lifespan end of Queen Victoria, there was no heirs or successors after her. So this whole process of Canada being in this nebulous zone, which is only on the water, has been going for 120, maybe 119 years, to be exact. And these things take time. So I think if this is something to worry about, if we are seriously talking about China deploying soldiers here, it's not going to happen right away. There are going to be steps to take us there. And I think we need to start taking steps to action. And one thing that I have done, and I'm in the process of doing, is forming common law assemblies. So I did a podcast with Kevin Annette most recently about common law assemblies and using these as ways to organize local people to form our own governments, essentially. Basically just ignoring all of this BS, all these acts, because it's not applicable to you if you know who you are. None of this stuff's applicable to you. The places that they talk about or the people they talk about, they're not you. Yeah, you've got that driver's license. Yeah, you've got that birth certificate, but you're aware that that's not you. You know, take a look at your driver's license. Look on the back of it, and it says property of the BC Motor Vehicles, something like that. It's not your property, so it's not you. And you have been unlawfully converted into that anyway. So that's a whole other conversation. I did a podcast with Christopher James, and we got into that unlawful conversion, which is a whole other can of worms that maybe one day there will be justice for, because we were all unlawfully converted to a person without our consent. We didn't know. They lied and told us certain things, and they converted us without our consent. And that is grounds for legal action. Whether that can be won in the legal courts, I'm not so sure. But the common law courts, that's something else. And that's where these common law assemblies come into. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to wish all of you the best of luck. Don't get too hung up on fear. Don't get hung up on fear at all. Look at the facts, read the acts, and decide what to do from there for you, and do the best thing for yourself and your family and your immediate community if you can. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope to talk to you another time soon. Take care.